Welcome to episode 1 of Divergent Dialogues. Today we are going to be addressing self-esteem. So we'll start off with a little definition of self-esteem. Self-esteem is a fundamental component of one's mental well-being. It is typically defined as a person's overall subjective emotional evaluation of their own worth. In simpler terms, it is how much an individual likes, accepts, and respects themselves on a global level.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so I think self-esteem is really important for autistic folks in their day-to-day life. I mean, I can certainly say for myself and my clients, that's something that can pop up a lot of the time, where there can be a lot of struggles in that area. And I really feel like if you don't have a good sense of self-esteem, it kind of puts this dampener on everything, really, because when you don't have a healthy self-esteem, you're not going to enjoy your life as much. You're not going to have as close connections. You may not have the confidence to go out and try new things. It's really important to have high self-esteem, or just have any self-esteem, really, particularly for autistic folks that can experience a lot of challenges throughout their life that impacts on their self-esteem. When we have high self-esteem, we're able to cope a lot better. We have high resilience. We're going to go a little bit out of our comfort zone to achieve things and try new things. And when we don't have a healthy self-esteem, we're not going to do those things. It's going to really limit us because we're not going to take a chance on friendships or relationships. We're not going to take a chance on doing something new. So it's so important to understand our level of self-esteem and the impacts that, the things that have impacted on our self-esteem, because that's something that can be changed. We don't just have to sit with how we feel about ourselves. We can change how we feel about ourselves and how we feel that we fit in the world. And I think that that's a part of what we want to do through this podcast, is for people to, identify with us and our stories and understand themselves a little bit better and how they move in the world. So low self-esteem, there's been research with autistic folks that low self-esteem, leads to feelings of worthlessness, self-doubt. It's also linked with poor mental health, so depression and anxiety. But conversely, healthy self-esteem often is linked with having a strong autistic identity and connecting with the autistic community. And it's even been, they've done research that's shown that the more that someone was connected with the autistic community and had a strong autistic identity, actually had higher self-esteem. So those aspects are really important. So yeah, I guess, Teena, what do you think from an ADHD perspective? Why do you think it's so important for ADHDers?
Really similar reasons. I think that the idea of self-acceptance, so accepting being an ADHDer, and whether you are the kind of ADHDer that just forgets everything and is always late, or whatever your struggles are, accepting that they are a part of who you are, and obviously doing things to try and support those parts of yourself so they're not impacting on life. But when you remove the judgment from yourself for being a little bit late, for thinking that you can build Rome in a day before getting to your 9 a.m. doctor's appointment, just being forgiving of making those mistakes and accepting that this is ADHD and these are the challenges that we have, and just accepting that you can't get it right all the time, but you're not a bad person for making mistakes.
Yeah, definitely. So Teena has some science for us today. So you wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, how self-esteem operates in the brain?
Yeah, so I think, drawing from Harms's multidimensional approach, thinking about some of those inner world concepts that impact self-esteem, like the biological dimension, for example, understanding which parts of the brain are at play. So the amygdala, which is our emotional command center, so to speak, that plays a key role in self-esteem, because it's kind of like the brain's drama queen, reacting to like positive and negative feedback. And research actually shows that people with high self-esteem have a more muted amygdala response to negative feedback compared to those with low self-esteem. So,
It's really interesting.
so like when we do have a healthy self-esteem and someone, gives us negative feedback about whatever, like our amygdala is not going to react to it the same way as if we would with low self-esteem, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah, and then taking into account like hormones and neurotransmitters, well, serotonin and dopamine, so like the feel-good chemicals, they're closely linked to self-esteem. So like low levels lead to feelings of unworthiness, while optimal levels can really boost our self-esteem, which, when we think about ADHD, dopamine is one of the things that our brains don't produce enough of. So that's really interesting, thinking about the links between low dopamine and those feelings of unworthiness.
Yeah, and that makes sense. It makes sense that the research shows that self-esteem is so closely linked with worthlessness and, poor mental health as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry, was there anything else you wanted to add, Teena?
Well, like the psychological perspective of self-esteem, it's influenced by our cognitive processes. So that's, including the way we interpret our success and failure, how much we understand the influence that we have over success and failure, our perceived control over life events, and our belief in our ability to achieve the desired outcomes of, what we want for ourselves. Emotional experiences such as chronic stress or emotional abuse, that like those things can really impact our self-esteem from that psychological perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I can say that for a lot of my clients, that the common theme when a lot of my clients come to me for various different reasons, but something that really underpins a lot of their struggles is the lack of self-esteem and the view of themselves. And sometimes when we work on that together, it's amazing how much of a shift and a change that it can make in their lives. But of course, there's a lot of relational, social, and cultural, systemic issues that impact on self-esteem. Particularly for autistic folks, there is a lot of stigma, a lot of misunderstandings around autism and what that is. So I think things are really changing now, particularly with the neurodivergent affirming movement. But there's some people do still get really challenging responses when they let other people know that they're autistic, and will be misinterpreted as well. So I can at least speak for myself. Like sometimes in social situations, it feels like I'm doing everything I can, and then you hear back later that you've been misinterpreted, and you're like, no, like, and then you're like spiraling, and and I think,
especially if you get on a tangent talking about your special interest, and next minute someone sort of suggested that you're quite condescending because you come from an evidence space, and it's like, oh my goodness, that wasn't meant to happen.
Yeah. So it's really challenging to, I don't know, like I feel like diagnosis is like a blessing and a curse, because I guess before I was diagnosed autistic, I was somewhat oblivious to some of these things that I did and why I did them. Whereas, but I mean, no, like I still did have that process where, you get negative reactions from people. So you learn to adjust your behavior through that. And I guess that's what masking is. But yeah, I think in a way, after I was diagnosed, I'm like hyper aware of those differences as well. And it can impact on your self-esteem when you feel like in every social situation that you're walking into, that you can be perceived in a negative way, or in a way that you're not trying to put across. So it can really impact making friends, or even just maintaining friendships as well, particularly if you've masked in the beginning, trying to continue that friendship.
Yeah. And I think from an ADHD perspective, for adult diagnosis, if we think just about what I was saying before about the amygdala and the muted response to the negative feedback when you have healthy or high self-esteem, if you've been getting, they say, research tells us that an ADHDer has received something like 20,000 negative feedbacks,
Wow.
by the first like 8 years of their life or something like that. And if you think about all of that negative feedback that we're getting, and we don't even have a diagnosis to try and understand, all of this in the context of it, then it's just about, you're a problem essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, thinking about, taking that into life, and the stress and the anxiety of constantly getting this negative feedback, it's really, really stressful. And it is going to impact your ability to, go for that promotion, or attempt to start a new relationship. It's all you hear is that, those negative comments about yourself, which are usually in that space of you talk too much, or like, oh, too much information, that's an overshare, and feeling like, what, that's just like normal sharing. So it's not understanding the negative feedback, because just because someone's telling us we've talked too much or we're oversharing, quite often it can feel a bit like, oh, you think that was too much information? What am I meant to talk about then? Because something neurodivergent people don't do very well is superficial small talk. So when everything else is oversharing.
And I guess something to think about when it comes to self-esteem as well is that we build it from when we're really young. And a lot of people that I've worked with, a lot of autistic folks, like, they have these negative beliefs about themselves that when we unpack it and talk about it, it stemmed from when they were really, really young. And it's these little insidious things that occurred during their early development, that they were like socially rejected, or they were excluded, or they were doing something and told it was wrong. And I think the hardest thing for a lot of autistic people, because we want an answer, we want to know why, and I guess I can speak for myself. Like, if I understand and know why something is occurring, even if it's really hard, something hard to swallow, even about myself, I can go, okay, well, I've got that piece of information. Now I can decide what I'm going to do with that. But, when you're a young person who's being, bullied, excluded, being, I guess, disciplined by your parents in a way because they're told that, if you're not acting in a certain way, keeping in line, or, even by teachers at school, you have to, present yourself in a certain way, that it's, it's really hard when you're told to do something, but no one explains the why. And you're just left wondering, going, okay, I'm not meant to do that, but why not? And, for me to do what you're asking, that feels really uncomfortable. And, again, I think that things are changing, that parents understand that neurodivergent kids have different needs. And I think in schools and things like that, but, like, we're of an age where when we were growing up, that really wasn't the case.
Yeah, the asking the why was always received as stopping argumentative, Teena. Like, you don't need to argue, just do as you were asked. And so, I'm not arguing. I just want some context and background info.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I totally get that. And when I'm working with families, that's a big part of what if there are meltdowns and there's emotional dysregulation, I'll go, okay, well, why is this occurring? Like, what's going on? And usually when we figure out what's going on, a lot of the times it's really simple. And, being able to address some of those needs and taking the time to explain to kids, why you have to do certain things. So, like, I can't think of an example for an autistic person, but like for an ADHD, like, it's sometimes ADHD kids can be quite impulsive, and it's like, okay, when we're out walking on the street, you can't just run around everywhere because it's a safety issue, things like that. Like, it's like, if you want to run around and be boisterous, that's fine, like, do it in the backyard, or do it in a space that's safe, but we can't just be going around, there might be cars and things like that. So I think when a child is told something is wrong, but it's not explained why, they learn to fear something that they don't even understand, or they learn, it doesn't really get the intended effect.
Well, yeah, because when you do sort of have some understanding of that why, then that's when you can start to apply it to different situations. But when it's just a case of don't run because we're near a busy road, then from an autistic perspective, it's quite literal. Okay, you don't run near busy roads, but that doesn't translate to car parks, for example. Like, the danger is still the same, that there's cars driving around and they might not see you because you're small. That all of that context is still there, but the literal translation is, you don't run near busy roads. This is not a busy road, so I can run through a car park.
Yeah. And I guess if we, bring it back to self-esteem, I think we took a bit of a side quest there, but that's fine. If we bring it back to self-esteem, I think a lot of the times when, neurodivergent kids aren't provided with a reason, they fill in the blanks, and the blanks are, I'm wrong, I'm defective, I've done something wrong, that there's something fundamentally wrong with me. And a lot of the times that's simply not the case. They may not have really done anything wrong. It may have been a misunderstanding, or sometimes it's just that it's not a good fit. Wherever the child is, it's not a good fit for them, like a school or what have you. So I guess it's really important to, when you're working with autistic people, to consider their self-esteem as part of the picture, because I feel like self-esteem is something that impacts so many aspects of your life.
And yeah, talking about the, what is self-esteem, and yeah, talking about those sort of childhood examples, the environmental factors, particularly during the formative years, they have such a substantial impact on self-esteem. Those childhood experiences, parental behavior, how much does a parent understand about a child's neurodivergence, and do they even know that their kid is neurodivergent? But I think also importantly, does the parent know about their own neurotype? I started my parenting journey not knowing my own neurotype, not knowing that I was autistic ADHD. And back then when my kids were small, it was so overwhelming and so overstimulating.
Yeah.
And if I had known back then, maybe things have been different. So yeah, parental behavior, that really influences that development of self-esteem.
Yeah.
The social circumstances, how much time do people have to give to these kids, and cultural values as well. It's all either going to nourish or undermine a person's self-esteem. So I think that it is really important to understand.
Yeah, and that's a really good point that you raised about parenting. So some of the families that I've worked with, the parents maybe they're pursuing support for their child, but they're not. I guess they haven't come to terms with whether they're not neurodivergent or what have you, and sometimes because of their needs, so like their sensory needs or their executive functioning challenges or what have you, they struggle to support their neurodivergent child in the way that they want to. When the child is really like they love their vocal stims and they're stimming away, and then it's like,
and you're a mum with like auditory sensitivity, and you're standing there going, OMG, can you please not make that sound because my brain's going to explode? It's just it's challenging.
So I think sometimes like I've worked with dads, but a lot of the mums that I've worked with, it's they really beat themselves up because they feel that they should be able to I guess support all of their neurodivergent child's needs, but they also need to support their own as well, and that can be a bit of a balance. So
I remember working with a dad. He's an ADHDer, and he just has so much love for his young daughter, and his wife had been trying to encourage him to spend more time doing her types of stuff. And we had this very interesting conversation about, how can I tolerate playing Barbies? He just wanted to be able to do this. I'm like, well, ADHD is a self-interest driven condition, and if you're not interested in Barbie, I don't know, how does she feel about playing footy? So yeah, it understanding some of the lesser talked about parts of autism and ADHD can be helpful when you're trying to make these changes in your life. He felt so horrible about himself and had so much negative self-talk about the fact that he couldn't tolerate playing dolls with his daughter because he wasn't getting any sort of dopamine out of it, and he felt like he should have been. And working through that, well, there's lots of other activities you guys can do together. It doesn't have to be this one. That had a big impact on his self-esteem and the way he was talking to himself.
And honestly, I think the biggest thing that parents can do for their children is to accept them. Accept them for who they are. You're not going to always get everything right. Like, there's no such thing as perfect parenting.
Well, the concept of good enough parenting.
Yes. But
Circle of security, talks a lot about that.
I guess for kids, having, looking back on their childhood and having their parent accept them and try to understand them, I think that's so important. And I think that's all really kids really need.
And, you know, Russell Barkley, he's one of my faves. He talks about the concept of shepherding your children, like as a parent, you know, rather than seeing your child as an extension of yourself and then therefore applying all of your stuff to them, recognizing that they are a human being in their own right, and they're going to have their own interests, opinions, strengths, limitations, or challenges, and learning who they are, but then just being that shepherd to guide them through and navigating life. So, you know, when they want to go off to university, being the one to show them the way rather than telling them what to do. And I really like that idea, because it really gives space for your kids to be whoever they are, and you as a parent completely accepting all of that and saying, okay, well, this is who you are, this is who I am, in the context of our family values and the way our family operates. This is the pathway we're going to take. And at any point they can go off on another pathway, but with full acceptance from you as their parent.
Yeah. And it's really interesting though, now that I'm thinking, is that often, you know, when I see children and families, self-esteem isn't really brought up until I kind of talk about it or bring it up. It's not, you know, well, I mean, let's face it, often when a parent reaches out to me, often it's the school. The school has come to them and said, look, there's all these behavioral issues. You need to go and see someone to sort out these issues and basically fix your child. And they come to me and I'm like, all right, let's see what's actually going on here. And, you know, when a child is told day in, day out that everything they're doing is wrong, they give up, because they're like, well, I can't learn in the way that I feel comfortable. I can't talk in the way that I feel comfortable. I can't exist at school in the way that I feel comfortable. Everything is wrong. No one's told me what I need to do, or if they do, I go, what? Like, I don't get that, or that doesn't sit well for me. So even just, you know, having one session where we're just talking about the child and their strengths and what they, you know, it does absolute wonders. You know, sometimes like that hasn't been the discussion at all. And yeah, it's really sad when that happens. But you know, I feel really privileged to be able to support families, to put them on the right track, and to be able to advocate, you know, for their neurodivergent kids. But yeah, I think, you know, parents and schools, they have such power to be able to support the trajectory of their autistic or ADHD kids. You know, setting up that really good foundation of self-esteem from when they're young. So when they're older, you know, they're feeling strong, they have a good identity, they understand their strengths and their challenges, and they can go on into the world and be their authentic self.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's really important. And, you know, we've just talked a bit there about, I guess, understanding who your child is, you know, touching on the idea that the age in which a person is diagnosed can impact self-esteem, because obviously knowing, the earlier you know, you can make those accommodations for yourself and whatnot. And I think something else that is really, really important to talk about that impacts self-esteem, which I can get a little bit soapboxy about, is bit ragey, is like the discourse surrounding ADHD and autism. So like starting with ADHD, it's the stigma around the diagnosis and the stigma around taking medication for ADHD. You know, there is still such a strong narrative out there that ADHD is not even a real thing. It is just poor parenting and, you know, like willful laziness, or whatever they want to say. You know, it's not, you know, there's enough evidence out there. There's enough research and studies out there about the brain differences, like the lower production of dopamine and norepinephrine, just to start with, that indicates it's absolutely a real thing. And thankfully, they've also understood that stimulant medication, and there's the non-stimulants as well, can help with increase that production of those brain chemicals, which doesn't make it all go away, but it certainly helps level the playing field a little bit. But then our medication is also stigmatized,
Yeah.
and there's a negative connotation attached to it, if you're using medication, and the idea that people only should be taking it when they're at work or when they're at school. But if you need that support to concentrate and focus and regulate yourself, why can't we be doing that when we're at home, on the holidays, on the weekend? Like, I want to be able to concentrate on my hobbies and a conversation with someone, just as much as I want to be able to concentrate on my work. But there's some sort of shame attached to the idea of relying on your medication every day. And it's like, well, other illnesses, diagnoses, conditions, whatever word you want to insert there from the medical model, is they're allowed to take their medication every day, but we're not. It's just that has a big impact on self-esteem, because ADHDers and autistic people hear the message over and over and over and over that we don't try hard enough. Like, from an autistic perspective around sensitivity and sensory stuff, I don't try hard enough to be able to tolerate eating a banana. I'm never going to get over that furry exterior and the slimy interior. It just doesn't work for me. But there's just that constant feedback that, well, if you just try it, why don't you try doing it this way or that way? And it's like, it's still furry and slimy. They don't go together. It doesn't work for me. It's not about trying harder. And,
so
when we then get that feedback around medication, and the idea that you just need to try harder, so you don't have to rely on your medication, it's just more of that negative feedback.
I totally agree. And shame is such a big thing. It's like, you should feel shame for being an autistic and or ADHDer if that's accepted, because there is the whole rhetoric around, oh, you're just lazy or whatever you are, or invalidating. But so it's like, okay, so you should feel shame for being neurodivergent, but then you should also feel shame for accommodating yourself or supporting yourself, or by whatever means possible. So you're between you're kind of stuck in the middle going, okay, well, I've got these needs, but if I address these needs, then that's not valid either. So it's like, well, where do you go from there? And it puts people in this really negative space where it's like, I know what I need. Well, for some people, maybe that's a struggle as well. But, for some people, they know what they need, but they feel shame to access that. Or it's really terrible.
I went to my pharmacy to fill my ADHD prescription not that long ago, and my pharmacist actually asked me, "Are you sure you need all this?" And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that. That's my script from my psychiatrist. Yes, can I please have that filled? And it was just instant shame. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's really embarrassing. I don't know what to do. So now I get my medication delivered.
Thank you to everyone for joining us for our first podcast. We're really excited to start this podcast and get it out into the world. So it's been a really good discussion around self-esteem, helping us to understand what it is, and also what, I guess, influences self-esteem. So next week we'll be having a look at the barriers to, I guess, fostering self-esteem, and also some strategies for you to be able to support yourself to grow a healthy self-esteem.